Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about custom fields that you can add to different places in Flex. So our primary focus is going to be the custom fields that are on the System Settings menu here. These custom fields will allow you to put additional fields in, for example, if you open an inventory model, all the different fields that you have. Let's just go with one of our mixers maybe. All these different fields that pop up as tabs, or in the tabs I should say. You can create some custom ones to show up in your own specific tab. Same with contacts. If we open a contact, we could create a separate tab with different fields on it for just a contact. So that's primarily what we're going to be talking about, is those kinds of custom fields here. Just so we're not confused, you're also going to find custom fields in your project element settings. I just want to show you what those are really quick. We're not really going to talk about it too much here. So if we go to project elements for our quote, for example, this is just going to be all the different settings for the quote element. And this does include custom fields that are very specific to just the quote element. So what this means is that if we set up custom fields here, then when we go to create a new quote, those custom fields will show up. So you can see they start showing up down at the bottom here. Options, priority, valid until. So we could put as many of those custom fields as we want, and then choose what kind of field it's going to be. For the most part, you'd probably choose like a date/time, maybe a contact selector, or just a simple text area so that you can enter custom text. But that's what a custom field is in terms of a project element. So again, if you just go to Projects menu, Project Elements, double-click the element that you want to add a custom field to, and then just go to that Custom Fields tab. What's really cool about these custom fields too is that once you create them and make them available on the new quote, or if you're editing the quote screen, you can actually take these custom fields and put them into your document views. Now we have some different webinars about document views and creating things like that, so we're not going to cover it here. But you can open up a document view and say, maybe in my header block, I want to be able to put one of those custom fields that I created. So I would just say which row I want to put it on, what the caption will be, choose whatever that was. It could be the options or priority, whichever custom field I created, and then add it by clicking that plus icon, and that would start showing up in the header when you open a quote. So again, a lot of that's covered in other webinars, custom fields and adding things to document views. That's not really the purpose of this webinar, but I at least wanted to show that briefly before we started getting into the custom fields found on the System Settings menu here. So let's close some of these windows, or tabs I should say, and let's just go straight into the System Settings menu and then click Custom Fields. The first thing I'll mention, let's quickly go to our user manual at manual.flexrentalsolutions.com. Let's look at glossaries and reference and the permissions glossary, because I realize that some of you might not see that option on the System Settings menu. And if you don't see that option, it just means that you don't have the permission to view that. So let's just briefly look at the permissions glossary. In fact, there's quite a few permissions in here. Let's just search for custom field. And we can find right here, in order to be able to see custom fields, it looks like you need to have system administrator permission granted. So if you don't see this on your menu, you're likely not a system administrator, or at least you just don't have the system administrator permission granted. If you feel like you should have that permission granted, then you can talk to your system administrator and they can grant you that permission. Or if you consider yourself a system administrator, but you still don't see this, then you can go into your user permission settings on the system settings menu and check out your different permissions and just make sure that you have that system administrator set to yes, or to granted, I should say. But now that we're here in the custom fields, these are just a bunch of samples that I created earlier. We're not going to deal with any of these today. We want to create a few from scratch. So let's think of our first example. Let's go back and open that inventory model that I had earlier. And while we do have a lot of different fields that you can enter information into by default, there might be something specific that you want to be able to put into a tab, specific information that's very applicable to you and your company, but doesn't necessarily show up as a default here in the tabs. So what we'll do, again, we're on the System Settings menu, Custom Fields. Let's go create a new custom field. Now let's say, for example, the field that we want to create is just a text area where we can hand enter maybe a specific reference number for the company that you get this item from. I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but let's just say that maybe there's something called like the PEK number or something like that. And you want to be able to put that into a field for this inventory item so that you have it for reference. So the caption is going to be, what is the field called? The type is going to be, is this going to apply to a project element or to a resource? Now, as we saw earlier, a lot of the custom fields that you might put into a project element, you're going to do from the project elements settings. So we're not really going to deal with any custom fields that are specific to project elements here, because you could do most of that in project elements. So let's just say this is going to apply to a resource. Your resources are things like your inventory, contacts, etc. So this is going to apply to a resource. That's our caption. The data type, we're just going to say is a text area. We'll look at a couple other examples of these data types. A lot of them are not applicable, but there's a handful of them that you would use in this kind of scenario. The permission is a really cool option that will say you can assign a specific permission to this custom field so that only people who have that permission granted will be able to see or interact with this custom field. So you might say something like can view inventory. I guess they wouldn't be able to open an inventory item anyway, but let's maybe say it is can manage inventory. So only people who have the permission of can manage inventory granted will be able to do anything or see this custom field once we create it when you open an inventory item. I usually don't like putting permissions on mine, but you certainly can. And the field ID is just more of an optional additional identifier for this custom field. You don't necessarily have to put anything in there. Now down here is where you really want to come up with some good consistent names, because the group name is going to end up being the tab name. So again, the field, or the caption is going to be what the actual field caption is, where you're going to enter the text. But this field needs to go onto a tab, and so we need to put it into a group or a tab name. Let me show you what this means. So let's maybe just call this tracking info or something like that. The ordinal we'll look at once we create a couple more of these, because we can put multiple custom fields onto a single group name tab, and then you could change the ordinal to say how high up is that on the list, do you want to move it lower, etc. We also want to choose a resource class, and in this case it's going to be inventory. We'll look at contacts later, but for now we just want to say this is for inventory only. And I'm not necessarily going to do this here, but you can also choose a specific resource type that this would apply to. I don't think this would necessarily be applicable in this scenario because when you open an inventory model, you can't necessarily view just rental or just retail. So I don't think that's really applicable for inventory anyway. But that will become more applicable once we get to contacts. Maybe you only want certain fields to show up for employees or for clients. For that resource type, you might filter by a specific resource type that it shows up for. So for inventory, not necessarily applicable. So let's get going with creating this one, and we can go back and reload our inventory item. And you can see we now have a new tab that's named after what we called the group name. And if we click on that tab, there's our field. Now one thing you notice is that this is a really large text field. And this number is probably only going to be 10 or 15 characters, so I don't need this large of a text field. Let's go back to our custom field that we created. And that's called a text area. So now we know that text area is that large text field. We have another text field that we can use. It's called free text. So let's choose that as the data type instead. Click Update. Go back and reload. And that's a lot better. It's not taking up so much space. So keep in mind, that's the difference between free text and a text area. Free text is just a small text box. Text area is going to be your larger text area. Let's put a couple other things on this tab. So let's go back to System Settings, Custom Fields, and create a new custom field. Let's say, since we're putting things into a tab we call tracking info, let's say something like can ship in van. And for something like this, we would choose what we call the Boolean. This is a yes or no option chooser. The group name, you want to be very, very careful that you put in the exact same name. So I often will just go copy and paste so that I make sure I have the spelling exactly right. Because if I do it a little bit wrong, then Flex is going to recognize that as a new group, and you'll get a separate tab with that incorrect spelling. And then again, we're applying this to inventory. So we click Create, go back to our inventory, and if we look at that tracking info, now we have a yes or no Boolean, and we have that PEK number that we created earlier as well. A couple other custom field types that you can create. Let's go create one more, and let's look at the data type. There are a few other things you can use here, like a date/time. So I might say something like last service. Now granted, you can use the log maintenance features in Flex to be able to keep track of services and things like that. But just for the sake of example, let's say that we're putting this in here. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste the group name because I want it to go on the same exact. Although this one isn't necessarily tracking info, but just for the sake of showing an example of a date/time, let's just create this really quick. And I wonder if I could just, I have to refresh the whole tab. So I'll reload the tab, go back to tracking info, and now I have a date/time chooser. And then let's just create one or two more showing these different field or data types. Another one that I see a lot of people use is a option list. This one's really cool because once you choose it, you can go and manage the options at that point. So let's say that this is responsible party. And I'm just coming up with kind of dumb names for some of these, but for the sake of example, it will work. So because I chose data type of option list, I click Manage Options, and now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose what the options are. So maybe I want to say group 1. In here, it doesn't necessarily matter what you choose. I'll often just choose text area or text, because all this is going to be is just a name on a drop-down menu list. Flex does require you to choose something, so you just have to choose something there, but it doesn't really matter. So I could add as many of these options as I want. Click close. And again, let's make sure we're putting this on the same group. Remember how I was talking about the ordinal? I could change the order and where this appears. And then just make sure I'm putting that into inventory. Click create. Go back and reload our inventory item. Look at the tracking info. And there's our option list. So that's just a start of some of these different custom fields that we can put into an inventory item. Or I should say an inventory model specifically. What you'll notice is that if I open a serial unit, so this item's serialized and I just open one of the barcodes of this serialized model, you notice that there isn't necessarily anything, or the tab doesn't necessarily show up here in the serial model. If we go back and create a new custom field, notice that one of the resource classes was serial number. So when I choose inventory, really all that's doing is putting those custom fields onto the inventory model page. If I want it to show up on the serial unit pages, so when I open up a very specific barcode of an inventory model, if I want that tab to show up there, then that's what I have to choose in the resource class's serial number. So in our last few minutes, let's create a few custom fields for a contact, and I'll show you some examples of ones that I've seen people set up. So we're going to do this in a very similar way that we did the inventory. In fact, let's close down some of these just so we have a little bit more working space. So again, this is all on System Settings, Custom Fields. Let's create a new custom field. And again, it's going to be for a resource, and the resource class is going to be contacts. What I've seen a lot of customers do, and in fact, we do this internally here in Flex, because in Flex we have our own Flex system that we do all of our internal business with. We use our own product. And so for all of our different employees, so for example, if we were to open myself, in our system, we have an extra tab here that's called something like travel info. And that's going to have all of our different information for when we travel to do on-site trainings or user conferences and things like that. So let's create that tab in my system, my test system here, and put some fields onto that tab as well. So we clicked New Custom Field, and let's say that this is going to be Delta Sky Miles number. The data type, since this is just going to be something that we're going to hand type in, we'll say is free text. This might be something that you put a permission on, because you don't necessarily want anybody to open any contact entry and be able to see all of their travel information. So maybe you would restrict this to maybe only somebody who can create and manage contacts, or maybe pick that to just system administrator. So this might be a better one to put a permission on. Again, the group name is going to be the tab that gets created. So we're going to call it travel info. And we already chose the resource class as contacts. And then, like I said, this is where you can filter and put it on only specific resource types of contacts. So I could come in and say, I only want this applicable to employees. So let's go back to my contact entry now and reload, and we should see that new tab. And I could enter my Sky Miles number here. Click Update, and that information should, if I close down and reopen, should stick. You just got to make sure and click Update. Now we could do a few of these. So for example, we'll go back to our custom fields, do new custom field, and maybe you travel with several different airlines. So you might have AAdvantage for American Airlines. And we'd just do the same exact thing. Free text, the group name, make sure it's exactly the same so it goes into the same tab. Resource class of contacts, and then if you want to filter, you can actually start typing in and it would show up on the drop down instead of having to click the binoculars icon. Then click Create. Let's reload and see how that looks. And let's say maybe I'm more loyal to Delta, so I would want the American ordinal to be after Delta. So Delta 0, American is 1. I think that's how it works. I haven't done that in a while, but let's double check. Yeah, so whatever's listed as 0 will be at the top of the list, then 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Let's add a couple other types of custom fields to this travel info tab. We might put a Boolean in there that says passport, yes or no. So then you can quickly open somebody's contact info, go to the travel info tab, and quickly see whether or not they have a passport, so you know if you can book them on international jobs or not. Create a new custom field, and let's look at some of these other ones that you might use. Again, like I said, a lot of these are really not applicable. Oops, wrong one. But let's just see if there's another one that we could use. We have that option list. We might choose that again. Let's do option list and say maybe this is preferred seat for when you're booking. Oops, I forgot I have to choose a field. Again, it doesn't really matter what it is. I usually just choose text for consistency. Just add those options, click close, and then let's put the rest of our information in there. Let's put this as number 3, contacts, specifically for the employee resource type, create. So you get the idea. You just create one of these one by one to start building up that tab. And then you could choose the options and click Update. If we just create one more, let's just make sure that we've kind of looked at all the different options that we can use. We probably won't cover all of them, but I think we've covered most of the major ones, like a date and time field, a Boolean. There's a contact. We could do that as well. Maybe we could say who books their travel. There might be a better way of putting that, but and so I think we've done this enough times where you get the idea of how you can start creating your own. So that's how you can create custom fields. Just as a quick recap, These are all found on the System Settings menu, Custom Fields. And really the most important parts about creating a custom field is that you give it a caption. And that's going to be the actual field name. Data type, which is going to be what type of field it is. Text, date, Boolean, option list, etc. The group name will be the tab that gets created where all of the fields will go onto, and then you want to be consistent, use the same group name for any field you want to go onto that tab. And then just choosing a resource class, whether that be inventory or a serial unit or a contact. So I hope you can find some use with these custom fields. I know that we have quite a bit internally here at Flex, and I've helped a lot of customers set these up as well so that they can put in specific information that may not be available by default here in Flex. If you have any questions about custom fields, then you can email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.